dear friends, I worked with Dr. Moeed Yousaf. We were a part of the same cabinet. I know him since last many years, but we were together for 6 months in the government, and he was simply brilliant and a real person Pakistan needs, actually. And now he's in the right position of Vice Chancellor, Beaconhouse National University, serving with the education sector of Pakistan. Thank you, Moeed.
We're all huge fans. Yes. 15 minutes.
So, Asfar, you've said two things. One, I'm in the right job now, so I was in the wrong job then. I agree with that wholeheartedly. And second, all of you know that Asfar lies now. So let me thank my very good friend Asfar and somebody I thoroughly enjoyed working with in government. Also to Nutshell, to Habib Bank, Aurangzeb Saab, and everybody else who's put yet another fantastic event together. So congratulations to all of you. Big picture, true to form, allow me to be provocative. It's late in the day, so I need to keep everybody awake, including myself. Let me give you 3 or 4 bullet points on the big picture, and then I'll come to talking about where we are. First big picture bullet is that the world has moved on from the unipolar moment. That's the biggest picture. The US hegemony, as we knew it, is now moving towards something else. We don't know whether it's bipolar, we don't know whether it's multipolar. What we know is that great power contestation is back, and back with a vengeance. This is not surprising. If you look at international relations literature, you'll find that unipolar moments are usually very, very unstable and very short. So we are in the next phase, and none of us, no country in the world, is going to escape some consequence of this. Whenever you have this kind of shift, you're going to have fluidity, and fluidity will bring opportunities and challenges. So the second big picture aspect that countries like Pakistan need to look at is whether we are going to be on the side of opportunity, or are we going to confront more challenges because of what's going to come our way. And let me just say that in the next phase of great power competition and geopolitics, unlike the Cold War, countries that are going to be most successful are those who are able to keep a multi-aligned posture for their foreign international relations. Countries that are forced to or choose to go in one camp versus another camp are far less likely to succeed. And the reason for that is very simple. There is one fundamental difference between the Cold War era and today, and that is the global economic integration across the world. You have COVID start in one country, and there is not a single human being who survived without being affected. Supply chains disrupted in China, prices rising as far as Brazil. A war in Ukraine, and Pakistan pays for oil and all sorts of other commodities way more than it did. This is here to stay. So, as I've always said, or recently at least, Pakistan's biggest challenge, foreign policy challenge, is going to be to avoid becoming a camp player. That's the second big picture. Third, Pakistan is in an especially odd, awkward, precarious, and yet potentially very opportunistic moment or situation. And that's because of our geography. If you look at the fluidity in the international world today, and if you look at the theaters of global conflict, you will find 4. The first one, where there's, I think, the mainstay of the contestation between US and China, is the Asia-Pacific, what the US calls Indo-Pacific now. It goes from Japan all the way in the west to India, and then other countries, of course. The second one is what I call the fires of the Middle East. In the last 20 years, there's been no major power that hasn't played a role in the Middle East in one conflict or another. And we've seen country after country disappear or almost disappear. That contestation starts from the Maghreb, goes all the way to Iran, that theater. The third one is less talked about, but Russia's backyard in Central Asia is intensely contested right now. And the southern tip of that, we saw the great game of the 21st century play out, was Afghanistan. Again, every single major power involved one way or another. The fourth theater is Ukraine and Eastern Europe. I won't talk about that. But the first three theaters, there is only one country in the world that is situated right in the middle of those three. So Iran is one border, India the other one, and Afghanistan and Russia's Central Asia backyard, the third one. And that's Pakistan. So if anybody in Pakistan thinks that we can escape the next round of great power competition and somehow hide as those headwinds come, it's impossible. We only have two choices. Either we become the proxy of one of the two or three great powers and live exactly like we did in the past 70 years, getting the quote-unquote resource inflow from conflict and all the consequences that come with it that we know of, or be proactively prepared to create positive interdependence with key global economies. So have enough to offer to both camps or three camps or whatever it will be, such that the cost of an unstable Pakistan is greater than the cost of a stable Pakistan for the rest of the world. That's essentially the challenge. That's essentially the challenge that every Pakistani policymaker should be grappling with day in, day out. Fourth big picture bullet. Pakistan did recognize this, does recognize this, and has been working on this. And a very clear, bold statement was made by the state of Pakistan last year in its first national security policy document, in which the country Pakistan, not an individual or a government or anybody, said that if we have to deal with what is coming our way, given what I've just explained, the only way to make that happen is through the economic security lens. Unless we can have economic security, we will be forced to become a proxy battleground for great powers. And to get to economic security, there were two things that it identified. One, Pakistan acting as the connectivity hub for the broader region, which will not only bring revenue, but it will create the kind of dependence of other countries in the region on Pakistan, such that creating instability in Pakistan would be very costly for them. And second, it talked about three avenues of raising non-debt foreign exchange: export, FDI for re-export, and remittance through manpower export. Everything else that we've heard today, I wasn't here yesterday unfortunately, falls under these three. Because you can't have export competitiveness unless you fix everything downstream. You are not going to be able to develop the private sector unless you have capital. And all of that fits under these three, because at the end of the day, Pakistan's recurring economic crisis is about balance of payments. We keep running out of dollars again and again and again. So the framework is there, the consensus is there, the question is, are we going to implement it or not? But let me just say this. Anybody who tries to present a proposition which says that more of the same is a survival strategy is living in fool's paradise. It just can't happen, and we are running out of time. Fifth big picture element. Unfortunately, we are not prepared for what's coming. I think there's a very enlightening talk by the caretaker finance minister, and one can't disagree with everything said. And I think Sansab is absolutely right. It's a very brave decision to be in that situation right now because the fiscal space is zero, essentially. But let me say why I think we are not prepared. I'm not talking of the technical side of this. This is a very provocative statement, but allow me. Number one, we are not prepared because the entity called the state, it's not one government, other government, one party, or anybody. The entity called the state, in its entirety, has lived by one principle for 75 years. And it remains obsessed with somehow continuing to live with that principle. Which is that from wherever I can find resources, whether it's external partners, whether it's donors, whether it's the private sector here, I will find those resources so that I do not have to change my habits. I will do everything it takes to maintain the status quo and the elite privileges, but I will not let that be undermined. If that remains true, there is no possibility of a turnaround. Every single person sitting in this room, including me, is part of that problem, whether we like it or not. Second, why I think we're not prepared is, and that's been talked about, the private sector and the public sector interact with each other on two principles. Number one, a complete lack of trust. I sat in a position, and Asfar did too, and others, and General Zubair is sitting here. Every time there's a conversation between the public sector and the private sector, the public sector response was, sir, niche dekhe, land cruiser mein aaye hain, tax break maang rahe. They're driving, millions of dollars worth of cars, and here they are asking for concessions. There would be pride in people coming to me and saying, sir, CEO of so-and-so company came, I made him sit outside for half an hour. And the private sector, with all due respect to everybody, I'm really sorry, Asfar, but I don't remember a single conversation where a private sector person came and said, help the private sector. Every conversation was about help me and my industry, and by the way, don't help my competitor, he's a thief. And you make it so easy for the public sector to play one of you against the other and maintain the status quo. So what I'm talking about is psychological more than practical. But unless we change this, I don't think we're moving ahead. And finally, and the reason I think we're not prepared is that all the change agents are not allowed to rise in our system. The system prizes people. The system prizes people who will ultimately sugarcoat to maintain the status quo. Just 2 more minutes. You said 2 minutes. Okay, thank you. I'm on time. So what to do? Again, I'm not going to talk about the technicalities. There are people much more experienced and qualified here. Number one, stop talking about what's right and publicly acknowledge that there is something fundamentally wrong that all of us need to fix. Number two, answer a very simple question, as the government, as the private sector, as all of us. Why should the world not bypass Pakistan when it's looking for partners to give benefit to? What are things that we have not done, due to which we do get bypassed whenever there is any real conversation on global economics. Whether it's trading blocks, whether it's investment partnerships, whether it's regional blocks. Whatever those things are, take those. Those are your national priorities. Start fixing them one by one. Let me just put out 5 one-liners. Number 1, unless the system, the political system is predictable, you can't make any long-term change. I'm not talking of stable, I'm not talking of this government, that government. Predictability of policy. Number 2, public sector, private sector dialogue as partners rather than as opponents or adversaries. Third, public sector only seeing itself as a facilitator, not as the chief regulator in town, and the private sector seeking benefits for the private sector, not for an industry or an individual or a group. Fourth, accountability of redistribution of resources, which essentially can only come through one avenue, strong local governments. That's the only thing I care about in terms of the political resource distribution. And finally, not going to happen, but you will know we're on the right track when any government in Pakistan makes your education budget multiplied by 10. Last word to ensure that Asfar does not ask me to fly from Lahore in the morning and leave in the evening again. I've noticed one thing in my time of interaction with the private sector, from my perch. There's a lot of executive training, there's a lot of grooming. We heard somebody from Engro talk about mental well-being this morning. All of that is very, very important and great. But I find one thing completely missing, which is that the entire capacity building of the private sector, even the biggest of our actors, is about day-to-day management. How do you deal with leadership? How do you deal with management decisions, stress, etc.? The entire government is also day-to-day. Tomorrow morning, yesterday, that's about it. We cannot have good strategic decision-making in the private sector unless the leaders understand what's happening in the world, how is that going to affect Pakistan, and where is the economy going? I'm very surprised when I hear business leaders ask the exact same question of me as anybody on the street, which is, Dr. Sahab, kya ho raha hai? Kya banega? Ye Israel kidhar ja rahe hain? This should be something that is your starting point before you get to day-to-day management, leadership, stress, and everything else. So one of the things I'm actually now doing and hopefully will bring to all of you is that Dr. Hafiz Pasha, who I'm sure all of you know and needs no introduction, he's at BNU and a senior colleague of mine. We've designed a workshop kind of program, a day-long or 2-day-long program, where we are only going to focus on 2 things with business leaders. What's happening in the world? Where is it going? Where will it be in 5 years? And how does that affect Pakistan? What's happening to the economy? Where is it going? What will happen in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years? And how does it affect Pakistan? And then we'll ask you, the business leaders, to figure out what that means for your business. Unless you do this, you will remain in the firefighting mode. So more on that later. Thank you very much.